Um, but this is a recording for YouTube, and what we're talking about today is coming together with women of consciousness, men of consciousness, uniting to talk about some really important aspects, with humanity, what's going on with the world, and how to bridge the gap between relationships between men and women, which I think is so important, specifically when it comes to communication, which is probably the hardest thing between men and women because the communication seems to always falter one way or the other. And some things that I'm going to bring up just now are, when it comes to communication, and something that I was talking about probably last week with somebody is how we sort of throw our strengths at each other as weaknesses in some ways, where you kind of hear sometimes, it's like, oh, the woman's place is in the home, or she should just not be working, or but they use it as a negative. And I was talking to a good friend of mine actually in Kung Fu, my friend Luke. He does men's circles, and he was talking about that, and he said, there is a lot to be respected in the roles that each one of us have. And it doesn't have to be, he's like, of course they can be warriors and all that, but there is this distinction and difference in how we relate to the world, based on certain things, like for instance menstruation, something that we have every month where we need to feel nurtured and all that kind of stuff, and we need to allow ourselves to rest. But also I do hear these like I don't want to say toxic things, because toxic's just kind of overused right now, but these things against men too, where it's like, oh, they should just be working and providing. And so it's like we just like throw things at each other, and I'm kind of figuring out, like, how do we heal that? How do we start to heal those narratives with men and women? That's why I'm so glad that you guys are on here. And Pam and I are very honored to have you guys as a part of this community that we're trying to create, because we really do want to heal those relationships. So Pam, do you have anything to add to that before we just kind of dive in and start having the guys communicate and talk?
I was so trying not to giggle at one point because we're on a little family vacation, and my 14-year-old son kind of made one of those comments to my daughter, who's
Mhm.
24 and has a baby. But he made a comment about like, "Oh, you belong in the kitchen," or something, and I was like, "What? What did you just say?" And of course he was joking. It was all humorous. But I have in my marriage definitely been told that, and yeah. So I'm just over here giggling about it, I guess. um
Yeah,
but
it does happen. Well, so tell me, what do you guys feel about that, John or Jeremy? Like, how do you feel about some of the stuff that's said, like, make it maybe negative energy that's been sent to you guys?
Um, Jeremy, do you mind if I go ahead?
Yeah, you're fine.
All right. I think that, like you were saying earlier before we started, I think we're witnessing a time where all these paradigms are shifting, and I think that the instability of all these paradigms is causing people to react, and I think that's kind of what we're starting to see. Where if people think women should be in the kitchen, I don't necessarily think that that's true because we're all individuals who have different strengths. Men should also not always have to be the one that are providing. So there has to be this healthy balance where we come together. So it can't just be, well, you know, you have to provide, but I'm not always supposed to be in the kitchen. It should be, this equilibrium of saying, well, I will take over some kitchen time as you go out and gather for us or whatever. So there has to be this cohesion in any relationship, and it has to be discussed, because if one person is saying, well, we need to have these old methods, and another person saying, well, we need to change these kind of paradigms, we're just going to have a mess and we're going to have chaos. So I think the more communication that men and women can have in relationships, and that's any kind of a relationship, I don't think that men should have to be the ones that are solely there to provide anymore, because we don't live in that type of a world. Where I also don't think that men shouldn't be providing, working around the house and that sort of thing. And I'm finding a healthy balance within myself now, taking care of my children and working. It's a healthy balance that I've discovered creates a better person. This allows me to embody both masculine traits and feminine traits. So I think we're just starting to see these paradigms shifting, and in that shift, we're just going to have to really be communicating on really what we feel our strengths are and what we're willing to do. And I think that's another big topic. What are we willing to do in a relationship? Because if you have somebody that's willing, to be a team player, then anything can get done. If somebody's saying, "Well, I can't do this because of some old belief system," that's what we have to change, and that's going to come through communication.
Absolutely. Jeremy, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I guess something simple I could sort of think to add to that would be like just I think being open and being willing to discuss just in general what like that new communication would look like, because obviously like you said, times are shifting, and that has to be something we're aware of, as well as just not letting go of the things that we are truly naturally good at or better than one another at or anything like that. We have to learn how to work together in the best possible way. But we have to just in general, I think, be open to the discussion and the change of, what that new way of working together looks like. Because I kind of think in a lot of ways, just like working together is gonna um be very different than times past, as
Mm.
well as like working on our own is going to be different from times past. We're dealing with a completely different world than these stereotypes that have become insults, like you said, that kind of
They have.
develop and everything. And I think in general we just kind of have to move beyond that, just have the respect, because I feel like most people who are pointing out things like that know we're not in that world anymore. They're just kind of using it as a get under your skin sort of like just anything that they can possibly do to hold you down and everything. And ultimately, to work together, we just have to be smart enough, smart enough, tough skin enough to get past that pettiness and actually have a real discussion of where this change is actually going.
So I'm curious to ask you guys, because it's really nice to have, you guys here with us and stuff. Is like, how did you get past that narrative, right? Because so I think from a woman's perspective, it feels everything, and this is not to say that the patriarch's bad, wrong, and all that stuff. We need both for sure. But
Mhm.
what how did you guys get past that narrative, or were you ever even part of that narrative where it's like this is a man's world and this is, because we see so many men who are, it's almost like know your place in some ways, and that's how it feels from the woman's perspective, right? It's almost like there's some guys who are just like, you're less than, you're not worthy. Women just shut up, know your place kind of thing. And I'm not saying that you guys ever carried that, but what is it you've done to kind of heal yourself to know like, hey, this is something I gotta heal. Like we need to work together. Like I gotta respect women and what they offer and what they bring.
Yeah, I mean, well, for me, I think it's just like just a development of self-confidence over time is the easiest way I can put it. I guess I've known for a long time that I really didn't fit into that whole mentality. I definitely, thought something different. At a younger age, I had a definitely, I guess, more of a tendency to be drawn into it and everything. I think there's, largely, and I could definitely point it out at different stages of my life. I've kind of gotten to that point of like, not caring, I guess, in a good way, where it's just like, I think it's ultimately that there's so much pressure like in the world to head that sort of direction and that way of thinking and go along with the crowd and all of that, like it just kind of is going to take ultimately a development of strong will to lead away from that, just having, good practices that you keep to yourself and everything like that, and like maintaining them, and keeping your mind on the higher goal, because it will be difficult to get to, and there's always setbacks. But um yeah, that's not a I wouldn't say by any means it's been an easy thing, but it really is kind of for me, like it directly had to do with like stepping away from the mainstream and having the confidence to, be myself when I didn't have a, crowd behind me or anything like that. Not that there necessarily was a crowd before or anything, but a crowd in terms of just the way that people are thinking and everything like that.
Yeah. What about you, John? Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like what Jeremy was saying, like I never really felt a part of the mainstream culture. And even as a kid, it was something that I was always kind of on the outside of. And, definitely going through high school, I kind of fell in with a subculture, like kind of a hippie traveling subculture. And what I found there was that there wasn't the objectifying of women that you were seeing in the mainstream. There was, this kind of like more we weren't really focusing on the whole goddess aspect yet the way things are now, but it was that kind of like women had more respect in the subculture than I was seeing in the mainstream culture. And then when I got to college, I was hanging out with a lot of different girls. They were all a lot of sociology majors, getting me hip to a lot of the things that I didn't realize. This was 20 years ago. So I kind of always had this feeling that, women should be at the same level as men. Even I grew up as a Catholic, and I never jived with the fact that women couldn't be priests. Even as a young kid, it didn't sit well with me that women couldn't lead the congregation. So I've always kind of felt this idea that we should have more balance, and then kind of going into that journey of my own self and trying to kind of attach to the divine energy, feminine energies within me, brings it out even more. And again, my ex-wife and I, we did that whole thing where I was the provider. I went out and provided for the family. She stayed home and took care of the kids, and both of us grew resentment toward each other for putting too much pressure on the other person, for her having too much pressure to take care of the kids, and me having too much pressure to make sure that everybody has everything they need and are fed. So we weren't able to establish a balance. And I think that going forward in these new relationships, we will be able to do that because we're recognizing that it's not a man's job just to provide. It's not a woman's job just to take care of the kids, but we have to, be a partnership. And I think we're just starting to see this new partnership. So for me, I've always been looking toward a cohesion and a sustainable relationship that's based on balance. So it's just, but we're living in a very tough society that is really not championing those messages, and we have to kind of step outside of our society and discover it for ourselves, and then re-enter.
Yeah, so then it kind of sounds like you two already had sort of this preconceived or pre-notion about the world around you, and kind of like there wasn't this balance, and looking more towards the balance for life, right? Not necessarily going with what these polarities are telling us, which is like you have to be this way or that way, but it's like a both and, right? Instead of like this either or kind of connection. I know my friend Luke was talking about like women got out there, they went to war. There was some women who didn't want families, and they went out there and they went to war. So it's not like fitting into these roles. And I think people get so stuck on, well, you have to be this way or you have to be that way. And because you're a woman, you're this or that. But I also do believe, part of me does believe in, Pam, I don't know how you feel about this, but part of me does believe that we do inherently have these natural abilities within us too, where it's like nurturing, right? Like if women, I feel, from my own perspective, my own story, if I'm not in tune with my own self-care and nurturing, start to get sick too, because then I become overly critical or hard on myself. And it's not to say that men don't experience the same thing, right? But again, we have cycles, right? We have cycles, and I think society's the mainstream, like you were talking about, has really ripped apart the sacredness of women's moon time, right? And some of the things that we hear, it is hurtful. And I mean hurtful in a way that it's hurting society for us not to be able to tap into that natural rhythm of ourself, right? Where it's like we used to give blood back to the earth. We used to do ceremony. We used to be able to convene together and take care of each other. And that's not like with the systems that are in place right now, that's not really how it works. Now we have this idea of, oh, she's on the rag. Those are things that we heard growing up. Oh, she's just bitching and has issues. She just, all of this stuff when it's something that should have been very sacred. And that's why I like that you guys are on here. I don't know how Pam has to say about that. And because it's nice to hear like that you guys are like, no, we understand that there's these differences, but also it's a shared thing. It's not just a one thing or another thing. Like there's healing there. And I think the communication between men and women is so important because you guys have these gifts that you bring that are like, I think Jeremy was alluding to that. Like there are some natural gifts. Men naturally are stronger than women. That's a natural thing, right? You guys have more testosterone. I mean, you can't get away from that. That's just the way you guys are built. And there should be some honor in that. For instance, I'm moving and I'm like, I know that I need my nephew who's taller, stronger to carry this big couch. I'm too short. I just, I don't have the strength to like carry it by myself. I'm gonna need some big men to do it. And I appreciate men for that. You know what I mean? I'm like, yay, you know, but I think there's that disconnect between that too. Pam, Pam, you've been quiet. What do you have to say or tell us? I don't know if you're talking, Pam, but we cannot hear you. These are like the technical difficulties. Trust me, listeners out there, we will have our stuff together next time we get on here.
There's not any live listeners,
know.
right?
It's just,
Like we were
well, no,
almost
it's
expecting something like that.
the what? Say that again.
We were kind of expecting something like
Just
that.
listening to everybody and doing whatnot. Oh. Oh, can you hear me now? No.
Yes. I think it's a
It's
lag
not
time,
working.
Merlin.
It's not working.
Maybe now it is.
Oh, do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. I have no idea. I'm literally snowed in the top of the Appalachian Mountains in the middle of nowhere. So we're getting some more snow flurries. It's already been like 16 inches of snow.
Whoa.
So I am definitely trying. No, I was definitely doing a lot of reflection and listening to like all of you guys and just, yeah, waiting my turn. Don't want to cut anybody off. I think for me, when as I'm listening and stuff and we're talking about relationships between men and women, um, I honestly, like I was 15. I've been really honest about that. I was 15 when I met the man that I ended up marrying. We had 4 children together and had spent, 17 years. So all of my teens, all of my 20s, he really controlled me. I never really, like I was the provider as well as the nurturer of the care, for the kids. He had a secret drug addiction that just got worse and worse that, was always there and he just hid. Um, so for me, it's been overcoming a lot of wounded masculinity that for some reason just always wanted to control. And even now I'm still kind of dealing with this external masculine energy that seems to just really want to harm and attack. So that's been my life experience, and that's really, really painful and a struggle because it goes into violence and abuse, mental, physical, emotional. So I'm very, very grateful that I'm no longer aligning shadow work, men for shadow work. There was a time when I was dating and it was like, okay, here's a soulmate for a minute to deal with more shadow stuff. So I got really good at just diving in, learning the lesson, and then moving along, right? I think that's the big thing. We are just searching for people and we get stuck. We get, in these comfort zones when we find somebody, and then it can either be really healthy or not, very wounded. So yeah, that's what I've been kind of just reflecting. And I think really thinking about for like you guys, I guess, the emotional state, right? Like how can men truly embrace their emotions? Because the anger and the aggression, like to me, it's like you got to move beyond that. You've got to be able to find vulnerability. And even with my oldest son the other day, I was trying, we're having again a family moment, and some tension between siblings comes up, right? And it's like, well, you got to face vulnerability to talk to your sister. And he couldn't do it. He was like, no, I'm gonna leave. And I was like, okay, well, that's survival instincts, fight or flight. You want to run away, That's okay. But you have to get comfortable with vulnerability to be able to really open up and have meaningful relationships. So I'm just curious on emotions for men.
Mm.
And what is the process? I don't know.
Yeah,
So
Well,
that's a good
confused. I
question.
don't know.
That's a good question.
well,
Right?
like you were saying, Pam, it's about vulnerability, and I don't think men are not supposed to be vulnerable. So, and like you were saying about the shadow work, anybody, any individual has to do their shadow work. They have to get to these issues that are causing this aggression and all these negative traits that surface, because there's an underlying root that's causing that. And until you get to that, it doesn't matter what conversation you're going to have. It's coming from a wounded place. So and again, for me, I constantly think I'm doing work and then feeling like, oh, wow, that's completely healed. And all of a sudden I realize how unhealed I am in these certain situations. So I think it's about doing the work and becoming vulnerable and willing to look at yourself and say, well, maybe I can be the problem here. Why am I reacting like this? But that's a difficult road. And it's a tough process, especially in the world that we're living in.
Mm.
And I think that's kind of the work that we're doing, because it's a slow progression. I don't think you can just go 180 degrees and change direction and be going the other direction, the opposite direction. I think that it's a process, and you have no idea where that process is going to take you, because you're hunting dragons at that point, and there's no telling where that quest is going to bring you. But I think you made a great point about vulnerability and just having to be open and vulnerable in order to get anywhere in these types of conversations, or even with yourself.
Jeremy, do you have a process of like vulnerability? Do you like, how are you able to get vulnerable?
Well, so in general, I guess I've just found like what we're getting into talking about right now to be, the much more difficult, like John just said, much slower process to get into. And like he said, I think some of those deeper seated issues that lead to things like anger, aggression and all of that. And that typically in men is how it, kind of comes out, and like having to actually deal with that within yourself is very difficult, because that's something, even in these newer generations that we've been raised in, like that's just something like you kind of are like made to not seem like a man if you're going down that route. And to
Mm,
me, like over time, I feel like you were more of one, but that's just because I've been willing to, for me, it started with like breath work and meditation. That's what allowed me to like kind of listen to myself, take the time and figure out the inner workings of myself to pinpoint the roots, like
mm,
he said, and then ultimately, push past them over time, which is the longer process and everything. But I think that's like kind of the thing. And like for me, like the opening up had to be like a kind of really quiet personal thing in a way. Maybe that's just
mm,
more my nature, but
Mhm.
like it started with like, meditation, breathing, understanding myself, getting to crossroads in my thoughts that I had to move past and come to terms with in order to find these root surfaces of, issues that come out with you and everything. And then, being honest with yourself, most importantly, when you come to that, because that's what ultimately causes the change for you to realize the truth and move past that and everything. So you know vulnerability, of course, is a big word, but I think honesty at that point, once you've learned to become more vulnerable, you have to be truly honest with what you're seeing within yourself.
yeah, I love that. I think that's good for just anybody too. I think that's good advice for everybody, not just men,
Mm.
but I think the aggression, and the anger, I think for women, it's a lot more scary, right? To see a man in his, like, it could be scary to see, trust me, you can see me mad and you'll run. But just the other day, I had an issue, right? Where this man, I was coming out of my, my parking spot, and he was trying to come into my parking spot. I told Jeremy about this, but it was really crazy. And he couldn't fit, like, he was trying to fit before I was fully out of my parking spot, and I'm like, and he honked at me, called me an F and B, right? I don't know if he was on testosterone, he looked like he might have been on coke and testosterone and everything else. Excuse me, Alexa, stop. And and then and so then I rolled down the window and I was like, I hope you're having a better day. I hope you have a better day. And he didn't hear me, and he's like, "What did you say? B?" And he called me the B word, and he got out. He was like gonna run up to me like he was gonna hit me. Now I'm in kung fu, so of course, naturally, I'm not afraid, right? I'm like, okay, I have some ability, but a woman who doesn't have the ability or training or something, like, it could be it's a lot more scary than a woman coming up to you and talking stuff. And he was souped up, man. This guy was like built, and it was weird because I'm like, if he had a gun, would he have shot me? So I looked and I said, I hope you have a better day. That's what I said. I hope you have a better day. It naturally diffused the situation, right? And he put his head down and he walked away. And I felt really bad because I'm like, something's going on with this person's life, that he feels like he has to resort to violence to somebody he doesn't even know. I could have been a teenager. He didn't even know who he was talking to, right, at the time. But I think that instills some fear, in women when men use that aggression towards them. I mean, it's like I had a father like that. He was aggressive and violent, and it instilled this fear where I couldn't be even gentle or kind to myself at the end of the day, moving through life. And I had to put on this hard shell because I'm like, I need to protect myself, right? And I think for women, it's really, we want to feel safe and protective in the space of men. Like, that's such an important thing for us. We want to be able to feel like we're not going to be attacked or hurt when this aggression and anger shows up or rises in men as well. So there's a couple of questions I have just with that. It's one, like the fear, like, how do you guys, how did both of you maybe face, how did you face that fear and that anger? Like, I know you said meditation and all that, number one. And the second question is, like, how can women support men to move through that process? Like, what do you guys need from us to start healing that process?
Well, I think the aggression and that kind of stuff comes from the wounds. And so that gentleman that you had the altercation with in the parking lot, he's probably more wounded than we could ever imagine. If we really started to, if he were able to be vulnerable and open up about his experiences, he might be able to transmute some of that energy and not have these reactions. But that's really what the formula is that everybody has to get to that root source of what's causing the anger. It could be issues that he had 35, 40 years ago that have just been compiling and compiling and being just being regenerated every single time that he wants to protect those wounds. Because that's just like, with an animal, if they're wounded and you try to approach them, chances are they're going to attack you because they're scared and they don't want to be hurt anymore. And they figure if they can attack you and get you at a distance, then you won't come close enough for you to see their wounds or that they're wounded. So I think that's the same with men in general, is that I think a lot before men and women in the greater aspect can kind of come together in one big healing process. Men need to heal with men, where I think, and that's even tough. I worked a lot of construction. I worked with a lot of guys that I'm looking at them and I'm seeing their wounding and it's coming out, and I know exactly where it's stemming from, but they're not going to address it. They're not going to drop down into that mode. Now, a group of men, that's where that support can come from, where everybody's kind of, in tradition, we'd be around the fire and we'd be fasting and hunt, and bringing up the empowerment in each man so that you can be full and you don't have to be afraid, so that when you go into the greater community, you don't have to bring your aggression because it's been dealt with. That's the kind of situation that we need to start getting into, where we can do our healing, and we're not so wounded, so we're not reacting from this wounded place, but we're able to actually communicate. And I think we're a while from getting there, but I think things like this are going to help, and different groups that can happen, and different techniques that we can learn. Like, Jeremy was saying, breath work. It's huge. Breath work is absolutely huge. But, then to get somebody who's pissed off like that, pardon my French, to sit down and do some breath work, then that's where the work is.
Yeah. I would say, I totally agree with that. And when you're talking about the level of the example that Natalie just went into, at that point, it is so hard to get someone at that point to actually open up and talk. I think that the first step is really recognizing that wounded animal, like knowing who's at the point of where they can be helped out at that point. And, because that's like the first step. Because if you're in a situation where you're, not just dealing with someone like that in the parking lot, you're actually dealing with them at every step of the way, of your, waking life, every day, every week, every month, I really don't know how I would say you can help something like that. Like someone like that has to, be looking into themselves like long before they're going to accept help from anybody else. So I would say, the first step is, recognizing that wounded animal, see who really is, hurting on that level that you can't, really reach them. And then, that'll allow you to avoid that. So then, whatever situations you do get into, that's going to be okay. Well, we can manage this. Um, their tendencies aren't as extreme. So, in that point, there can be a lot of help that can be done. As far as like what you can do to assist it, I mean, like I said, truthfulness, honesty, that's always the best place to start. Just developing habits of like, working on this type of stuff, both together and, like John said, separately. There's certain things that are just going to be better done separately, so that when, things do come together, they can be smoother, and then I think, that just comes down to a personal accountability of handling all aspects of your life, being someone who can, figure things out, like when you're on your own within your own mind, and then learning, what exactly has to be, compromised or changed when you're working with, just a single individual or group of individuals, whatever it is, whatever, relationship or type of relationship you're talking about, so but yeah, as far as just the first step of that, like I think just teaching people, from a young age, to, be accountable for themselves and learn to see, those wounded animals, treat them as what they are. You wouldn't go and, kick a dog that you see bleeding in the street, and I think the way that people who are wounded act, like it kind of makes people want to, fight back at them, so first off, I think, just learning to not engage in that, like fighting fire with fire, that's an old saying for a reason, it never works, to take on aggression towards another form of aggression. So I guess that'd be another thing to think of as a first step. But yeah, just I'd say, recognition, being sharp enough and teaching people to, notice these type of things. We're not taught emotional intelligence like when we grow up and go through school and things like that, and if we were, people would recognize these type of things easier, avoid these type of situations easier, and all of that. But that's why we're trying to teach ourselves to learn these things and everything, right? Because there's
Yeah.
not an easy answer to any of these questions.
No, and honestly, I know there was some type of healing. It's funny because my niece was with me and she's like, she wants to fight. She's a fighter, right? Right away, she's like wanting to jump out of the car. And I'm like, oh my God, no, and it worries me for her because, this guy's, he's stronger than her. And who knows? He could have a gun. I don't know what he has, a knife, but who knows? She doesn't know how to defend herself against that kind of stuff. But I think just telling him, I hope you have a good day, really, he put his head down because it's like he knew instantly, like, okay, whatever he was going through, because that's another thing. And hopefully you guys can answer this. It's like I don't want to fight. And I don't want to fight with men. I don't. I want to love men. I want to have a healthy relationship with women and men alike. I want to be able to have good conversations. I want to be able to sit down and have these hard conversations with my brothers and sisters and not have all this pent up aggression where it's like, oh, now I feel like I gotta harm you or vengeance or whatever it is that comes out in the long run, and I know that, part of it is the sisterhood. Like Pam and I are working, right, to collaborate with other women, really heal that. But I think it's the bigger narrative. I mean, we have the yin yang here for a reason because the communication between men and women is something that it has to be healed in some way. So how do you feel like we as women can help men? Like how can we support men?
Well, I think kind of like the way you reacted to the man in that parking lot is to be the energy of the situation where he couldn't really react. See if like your niece kind of wanted to get out and start yelling at him, that's kind of what he wanted. He wanted that interaction. He wanted to continue that aggression because that's probably what's feeding his ego, and it's helping what he thinks helping his wound, but it's not. It's not. It's just kind of placating that wound and kind of adding to the reason why he said, well, this is why I have to react like this because someone's going to react like that to me, where you kind of just calmly, brought in a different energy. He recognized that there was no use for aggression in that situation anymore. So I think that's what men and women need to be doing, is doing their own individual personal work, so that when we are confronted with these higher energies, we don't have to go to that level. We can hopefully create a situation where they come to our level of saying, I'm not coming from a wounded place. I'm coming from a healed place. And even if we're not going to be able to communicate, I just want to let you know you have a great day and we can be on our way. And I think that's really where it's at right now, is just not adding to the confusion of the situation, not adding to the aggression, but just saying, hey, that's the way it's going to be. And then we can just part. And I do hope you have a great day.
Yeah. I would say I agree with that completely. Just a simple just nice comment or gesture or anything like that when it definitely wasn't deserved is, ultimately, like you said, that's what caused pause. That's what actually caused inner reflection. Now, to the depth of which he took it, who knows? It may have stopped before he allowed it to go anywhere. But I think that's kind of the thing. Like, what you did was a cause for inner reflection. And I think that main point is what I would, kind of point out, because anything that you can do that's going to cause them, no matter how far away they are, to actually think about themselves and their actions, like I said, that's where, from what I've seen within myself, and I truly believe in what I've seen from others I've talked to, that's, the place where the change comes from. There's nothing that you can truly, overstate and say. I think, given a complicated explanation of why his behavior is wrong is, it's just going to be counterproductive at that point. So, it may have seemed like that situation wasn't a win, but in my eyes, I would say it was, because you really reacted in the one way I would say is better than any other. It wasn't going to be a smooth situation no matter what.
Yeah, and it's really sad. I mean, for me, it's more sad to think that there's people walking around like that, that are just not happy and miserable. And, I agree with you guys. It starts with their inner work. And I think that's what's so important about what we're doing, is like really wanting to work with people who are ready to do inner work, people who are committed to really looking at themselves and, healing that, because that way we can come together and have these deeper conversations, right? And it's like, how can we support each other? Like, you know, and perhaps that's something to reflect on, so that when we meet next time, it's like, really, what is the masculine seeking from the feminine? What is it? What is really that wounded energy seeking? Because there is this wound over the masculine, right? And the same for the sacred feminine or the wounded feminine. What is she truly seeking from the masculine? And I think those questions are the bigger questions. Like, I know for me, it's protection and safety. I'm really seeking that. I want to be around men who I feel safe around and protected, and not like I'm walking on eggshells and like I'm gonna get harmed or be hurt or even made fun of or told, these things. Oh, you're just on the rag. Oh, you talk too much. Oh, you this. Oh, that's just the what women do. They talk, those kind of comments. It's like I don't want to be around that. I don't. That doesn't feel safe. So that's coming from, a woman's perspective. And then on the same account, it's not just about me and all women. It's about, well, what is the wounded masculine seeking in women? What exactly are they wanting to experience when they're around a group of women, right? And how can we kind of heal that space together? And so, and maybe we don't have an answer now. I don't know. I mean, Pam, what do you feel? I know you've been quiet and I hope you can, I hope it comes through. Like, what is it that you want to feel when you're, in the presence of men? See if it comes through. I know. I hope you're drinking hot chocolate in the middle of the winter out there. That's what I'd be doing. Ah, Pam, it's not coming through. All right. I don't know if, yeah, it's not coming through, Pam. I don't know. Communication meltdown. Dun dun dun. I think it's okay, Pam, if you can't, like, on this podcast, if you can't come on, it's fine. We can do another one whenever you're back home, and you know what I mean, and get Jeremy John back on and stuff like that as well, because we're going to be doing these regularly, hopefully, just because I think we're at a place where you're right. I think all of us have done some individual healing, and now we're coming together to have these dialogues and conversations, right? Um, so, I really feel like maybe that can be sort of the next thing that we talk about for the next one, is like, what is the feminine seeking? What is the masculine seeking, in healing, right? What is it that we're trying to heal with each other, within ourselves around these dialogues and narratives? And can we come together and do it together as a team, right? Not separately, but together. So hopefully we can kind of show people that it's a possibility, right? Like, yeah, we want you guys to be authentic and real, and tell us the truth about what you need from, the sacred feminine, healthy women who are healed. What is it that you're wanting to experience when you're around us? I'm curious. I'd want to know, truly. Um, and I'm not afraid to say what I want to experience either, and what maybe needs to be healed around that as well. Pam, are you trying to talk? We're still not hearing you. Right. So, so I think with this podcast, you guys have anything else you want to add before we end this podcast or this YouTube talk, whatever we're calling this?
No, I mean, I think that the greater collective has so many individual issues, and I think that that's why we each have to get to our own individual healing process and be that kind of higher version of ourselves, so that we can then share our gifts with somebody else, and try to talk somebody else through the path to their own healing. It's a lot of work. I know it's a lot of work in me. I've been on this path, and just when you think that you got things figured out, boom, here it comes again. And it's just continuing to do the work and not being discouraged and trying to be the highest version of yourself. And if we can all just kind of get to that mindset, it doesn't matter really where we're at. We're all going in the right direction.
Love that. Jeremy, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I mean, feel like, the reason, you know, our conversations so far have been pretty natural and easy to get into is just for that very fact, which goes, to the point of what we were, talking about earlier of how much it really means to, have actually, looked inside of self, and how much more that gives you, as a tool to, assist in conversations with others and all of that. So yeah, I guess just that to add, but yeah.
So I love that. So I think, I'm sorry that Pam couldn't provide me more information or couldn't speak or the communication meltdown with Pam over there but enjoy the snow, Pam, because I mean, you have one more day to just incubate, I guess, before you actually get home. That, we will continue this narrative. I think it's really good to say, look at yourself. It's not so easy. Also, really asking people who listen to this to look at, like, really, what is the fear? How do you touch your vulnerability? How do you move through the anger and aggression to really get to the root, like you guys were saying, to the root causes and being truthful with yourself about what they are. I think that you're right. I think vulnerability, but that truthfulness, because we want to deny sometimes the things that surface because it scares us, right? We're like, I don't want to become that. I don't want to be a bad person, but you hold it in so much that that's actually what ends up happening, right? Because you're not able to give it, space to be released or whatnot. And I feel like that, I think those are really good takeaways from this conversation, and also really starting to think. And I think next time we can really dive deep into, after we do some of our own reflection, really, what is it that we're asking to be healed between the two of us? Like, I know, like, I was able to share some of what I want to experience when I'm around healthy masculine energy, and what's important to me, but also wanting to know what is important to men. What is important to you guys as men. Maybe you can't speak on behalf of all men, but what is important to you as men? And I think that'd be a great conversation to have next time around. And Pam, like I said, sorry that you couldn't get on. I know it's not working for some reason. But follow us. We are, so we're looking into developing Men of Consciousness is under discussion, but we do have Women of Consciousness. You can follow us on womenofconsciousness.com, at Women of Consciousness on Instagram, and on Facebook as well. You can go follow us. We also do a podcast every Tuesday. Pam and I do our podcast then. And we are going to be expanding. You can also donate on there for the community that we're trying to create, as well as services provided. We do some oracle readings, tarot readings, and also coaching on twin flame stuff. So there you have it. We appreciate you guys showing up and listening to us, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.